instruments, not professionally, but played at home all the time. My dad plays the guitar and sings. My mom played the violin when she was younger. She also sings. So music was a big part of my life when I was growing up. My brother also played the guitar. It was never, like, it seemed very natural that I would want to play an instrument when I was growing up. That was something that they encouraged. When it became clear that I was a little more serious about this and a little more excited about doing this after high school, in college, for the rest of my life, they were also really, really encouraging, which I know is not always the case. I have many friends who that wasn't the case, so that was very, very helpful. The other person who is really, really important to me is the guy that I studied percussion with at both undergrad and grad school. Studied the same guy. His name is Robert Van Sice. He had taught many, many wonderful percussionists before I got there, and he really, he really changed my life and made it possible for me to do what I do. He taught all the guys in So Percussion. I don't know if you know that group. He taught a lot of the winners of the recent percussion competitions. Many of the teachers around the country that teach in universities came from his studio. He is a very unique, very incredible teacher. Then I went to the Manhattan School of Music for my first year of college, and I was having a great time, great percussion department, great school. But then I met Bob Van Sice, this guy I was going to study with. I went to a master class that he was giving at the Juilliard Pre-College. And I saw him teach, and I was really blown away. I called him up after that, and I had met him the year before because I had auditioned for him, but elected not to go to his school. But I called him up and I said, hey, I really enjoyed your master class. Could I come up to one of your schools and take a lesson with you sometime? I'd love to play for you and get some feedback. We had a really, really great, intense, like 3 or 4 hour session. And at the end of that, he kind of just said, if you're interested, I do have an extra spot at Peabody. If you wanted to transfer over there, you could start there in the fall. And so, it took a while to feel good about that decision, but eventually I did, and I went down there, and it was a really good move for me. That program was a little more focused towards the types of things that I wanted to do, and working with Bob was a really incredible thing. Definitely the best decision I've ever made. And so I stayed at Peabody for a few years, got my undergrad degree, and then I went up to Yale and continued studying with him and got my master's in music and then my artist diploma actually after that. I think it became apparent very, very quickly in undergrad that what I was really interested in doing was contemporary music, but also chamber music. I really loved playing chamber music, like in small groups, whether that means percussion groups or with a violinist or a pianist, that sort of thing. That was something I really liked. It's one of the best things that Bob taught. He was really, really skilled at teaching chamber music skills, which was something that I had never experienced before. And so that was really interesting to me. I love the intimacy of those sorts of experiences. I guess it's kind of both, certainly with the other players. I mean, the connection that you're able to get if you're on stage with 3 or 4 people is much more intimate, much more special, in my opinion, than the connection you get if you're in an orchestra. I mean, look, playing in an orchestra is an amazing experience too. You can never feel that sort of power that you feel when you're playing a Mahler symphony or something like that with 100 people on stage. But in terms of like personal connection with 1 or 2 other people, the way you get that in chamber music, for me, it never happens in anything else. I think that it also applies to that connection with your audience. Being so close to your audience and feeling like it's just an intimate space, because there's only a couple of us on stage, or if you're playing by yourself, you're the only person on stage, and there's nothing in between you and the audience. There's no conductor, there's no huge orchestra, and there's usually not like 2,000 of them. There might be a couple hundred of them, and it feels a lot easier to communicate what you're trying to say, for me at least, in that kind of environment. When you put together a chamber music group, the way that the people react to each other and the way that people work together is almost more important, maybe it's better to say is equal to like their level of talent. It really doesn't matter, certainly at the level of ability that we're talking about here, it really doesn't matter if someone is the best percussionist in the world or the 5th best percussionist in the world. If the best percussionist in the world is really not fun to work with, like it's not good in that kind of environment, the 5th best percussionist is better in every situation. And so yeah, I've definitely experienced that a lot. Like for example, when I auditioned for this group, that audition process is very long and drawn out. It involves weeks if not many, many weeks of rehearsing with this ensemble, hanging out with this ensemble, all going out to dinner with the ensemble, all kinds of stuff, just to see if your personality is a good fit with their personalities. And if it didn't work out for me, that wouldn't necessarily mean that I was a jerk or something like that. It would just mean that I wasn't the right fit for the ensemble. Well, it's not like orchestra auditions. You know, that's different. You just go in and you play, usually behind a screen. That's a much more anonymous process. But you know, it's different. If you're in a chamber ensemble with someone, you're going to be spending many more hours. You have to love these people. You have to feel like you can say anything to them and they won't be offended. You can't hold resentment about anything. You know, it just won't work, especially if you're looking to have an ensemble that's going to be together for a very long time. You know, string quartets have been around for 40 years. It's not that there are exceptions to this, but it's not so often that two people really don't like each other. Like, that doesn't really work if you're going to spend that much time together. You know? Well, I think it's actually somewhere in between the two of them. Like, I don't think that a certain piece has objectively the emotion of love in it. I mean, the composer may have written it with love, but that doesn't mean that the audience member or even the performer will experience that emotion in the same way and will transmit it in the same way and will get it in the same way. I think it does have emotion inherently, but that emotion, what the exact experience that you're going to have, is up to you. It's going to be different for everyone. I think that is what is so special about it, and why it's such a universal language, why it's such an amazing thing that can connect with people of, you know, all ages, all types, all backgrounds, because of that. That's because it does stir something in you, whatever that happens to be. No, I'm not saying that. No, because everyone could have a different type of reaction to that. I mean, you know, that's a pretty clear-cut example. It's hard to feel something much further than sad. Like, I'm not sure that you would hear joyful exuberance when you're hearing that piece, but maybe someone, it's not so much sad, it could be slightly depressing, or maybe slightly, there's some hurt in there. I mean, there could be different shades of sad that are completely different based on everyone's life, everyone's experience. But, you know, I think composers, there are ways that composers can write certain passages, certain phrases that will aim to evoke a certain thing, but in the end, they're just kind of throwing it out there, and you're going to accept it in any way you can, you know. They haven't seen a good new music concert. So the thing that people don't understand is that right now there are more composers than there have ever been. So there's tons of new work being written, but at every time period there was a lot of work being written. But, you know, we remember Mozart, we remember Beethoven, we remember these people, and we don't remember a lot of their contemporaries because they weren't as skilled composers and they didn't write as good stuff. So nowadays, people might go to a contemporary music concert and see a composer who might not turn out to be the best composer, or might be performed by an ensemble that is not the best ensemble, and then they put a blanket statement over it: new music has no emotion, it's not interesting, it's too loud, whatever they happen to say, whatever their experience of that piece was. But no, that's not true. Maybe that composer is too loud for you. Maybe that piece was emotionless to you, and that could be totally true, totally accurate. I feel like it's the same thing if someone goes to see a concert and they don't like it. I wish that they wouldn't just say contemporary music is not interesting, is not fun, before maybe checking out maybe asking someone, okay, wait, so who is the best new music ensemble in the world? Who do I really need to check out? Oh, I need to check out 8th Blackbird? Okay, and then listen to that CD, and then decide if this is for you. That's fine. He is, in my opinion, one of the greatest American composers of our time. He completely created a new genre of writing. He wrote music in a way that people really hadn't been doing before him, and he does it at a really, really high level. You know, it's not for everyone. It's minimalist. It does the same thing for a long time with very minute changes. For me, those tiny changes, they are so satisfying, and I think that Steve Reich is such a genius because of the exact moment that those changes occur, they're not haphazard. They happen right when you are done listening to the last thing. It's at the perfect moment, and it's also the perfect shift in harmony or color or whatever it happens to be in such a satisfying way. Also, this might be like a performer bias, but for me, performing Steve Reich is like an otherworldly experience. It's such a rush. It's one of the most exciting feelings that I have playing anything. It's so much fun. There are a lot of young composers doing really amazing things now. There's this guy, Andy Akiho. He used to be a percussionist, is still a percussionist and a composer. He again also writes music that is unlike anything that came before him. He specializes in inventing new ways to play his instruments. So he's writing a piano piece, but it's not just a piano piece because the pianist is, swiping with credit cards on the strings, or, we're going to hear his cello piece tonight. Where the cellist puts clothespins on the strings of the cello, and it turns the cello into this like gong-like instrument. It's this beautiful sound that is unlike what you would think of as a cello sound. So he's sort of reinventing how you write for these instruments, and his music just sounds fresh and sounds new, and it's really, really exciting, really, really fun to listen to. Well, because people play traditional instruments. These people have been practicing these instruments for decades, and they're they can do anything on these instruments. And so if you want that level of ability, you kind of have to write for one of these instruments. Otherwise, you can totally build a new instrument, but if it's a completely new instrument, you're going to be limited on what you're able to do on it until you spend a long, long time on it, So I never thought about it that way, but that could be one of the reasons why composers initially started, like John Cage was one of the first guys to do that. He prepared the piano because he wanted to find a way to create a percussion orchestra, but only do it with the piano. It would be easier if he could just travel around with the piano. It'd be really great if he could just do it that way. And so he did. He created this whole sound world that is nothing to do with the piano, but a pianist can still play that instrument with the technical ability that they could play anything on the piano. Whereas if he built that percussion instrument, and certainly back then when there weren't a lot of world-class percussionists walking around, he probably couldn't have written the exact same stuff, certainly not stuff as difficult as he wrote on a new instrument. A world-renowned cellist, a really, really good cellist, is an amazing musician who is really skilled at playing that instrument, and maybe the composer just wants to write something for that person. The fact that that person plays the cello, that's just happenstance. He happens to play the cello, that's cool, but he just really wants to write something for this person, but he's not really that interested in only the acoustic traditional sound of the cello. So if he's going to write something for this person, he's going to create some way to make it more interesting to him. But with percussion, people are building new instruments all the time. Like you saw me play that Chris Cerrone piece in Atlanta. And a few of the movements of that piece were for this wooden instrument, where I had 20 some odd slats of wood. Just boards of wood, but they're cut very specifically so that they ring at a pitch on the piano, and I make this sort of pentatonic scale throughout all of these pitches. And that was an instrument that he decided that, that there are wooden percussion instruments that sound similar, but he decided that was not the right sound, wasn't the right affect for this piece, so he built this instrument and thought it would work better. And now if a percussionist wants to play that piece, they have to build that instrument and learn how to play it. That's a little more specific to percussion, We're the guys that the composers always feel like they can throw anything at us if it doesn't exist yet. I think they'd be a little more hesitant to ask the violinist or the pianist to build a new instrument. For some reason, we've just ended up as the types of people that like doing that sort of thing. I wouldn't say I'm a great improviser. I do improvise. In contemporary music, you are asked to do various degrees of that. Certainly not to the extent of, here's a picture, do something, but more like, okay, for instance, last week at our concert, one movement of the work that we were doing was this piece for all six of us, but we were given a pitch collection like, here's a scale, here's 7 notes, and I want you to improvise gestures. And he gave some guideline, like, they're sparse, they're mostly soft, and they use a small range of your instrument. But we had to make up the gestures. And then after a minute, the scale shifted just a little bit, like the A became an A flat or something like that, got a little louder, a little busy, and it sort of moved in sections until finally we got to a climax where we were in a much brighter scale. Playing very loud and very consistently, like I was playing straight 16th notes or something like that on my instruments. So I think that's something that I have a lot of experience with, sort of an improvisation that is guided in some way by the composer. It gives you lots of directives in terms of what he's looking for. I've had some experience with total free improvisation. One of the more rewarding recording projects I ever did was this session with this drum set player and this woodwind player from New Zealand, both of them. And I had met the drum set player before. We had never played together. I didn't know. I had only met the woodwind player that morning. And we just sat down in this recording studio and improvised for like 2 hours. And they had done this sort of thing a lot. They were in this free improvisation scene. They do lots of concerts where they just get up on stage and do that. It was a new thing for me, but I learned so much from them about how to structure a piece of music. We weren't, you're not just playing random things. You're responding to each other and sort of building to different places, just like you would in a piece of music. That was really that was a lot more rewarding for me than I thought it would be when I had considered doing it. When I play almost anything, my underlying goal is to make the audience think that I could be making it up on the spot. I don't want it to feel like I'm just regurgitating notes that a composer wrote down on a page. So if they thought that it was improvised, and I have to tell them that actually no, everything was very specifically written out, that's kind of a cool feeling for me, because then I feel like the performance feels very, it's very, what's the right word? It's just very, very organic. It feels very natural. It feels like the notes are just pouring out of me, and almost as if I'm speaking. It doesn't feel like I'm reading that and playing that, and there's sort of a disconnect between me and the audience. You just look at jazz. I mean, there are people who can improvise amazing solos in a jazz tune that have melody, have structure to them, really say something, and then there are other improvisations that are just sort of less meaningful sorts of things, more just vehicles for displaying the prowess on whatever instrument you're playing. But it's becoming more common for classical players to know how to do that thing, at least on a low level, to have some familiarity with that sort of playing. I really admire the So Percussion Group. They were one of the first contemporary percussion ensembles in America that made their living, that was what they did. Just like a string quartet, their job was playing in this group. And they really paved, nowadays there are tons of percussion groups, which is amazing, all over the country, all over the world, and they had a huge part of that. They would go to schools all across the country to give little clinics and stuff like that, and they would show students what they were doing, and it would be completely alien to them. At that time, it's not like that anymore, but we're talking 15, 20 years ago, or not quite that long, 10 or 15 years ago. And they would just sort of inspire this whole new generation of percussionists that playing percussion chamber music is a really exciting, really fun thing to do. It's a viable way to make a living if it's what you really want to do, and it's worth studying, it's worth spending time on. But before percussion chamber music became a thing, you had percussion ensemble, which is like a larger group, maybe 15, 20 people. It's conducted. There are a lot of works for that size of an ensemble, but they would also do lots of transcriptions. You might do a Beethoven symphony or something arranged for percussion ensemble, which is really rewarding and really helpful for students to learn about phrasing and about music like that. But it's not really our music, And so now, So Percussion and groups like that are commissioning all kinds of amazing people. They're commissioning David Lang, they're commissioning Steve Reich, they're commissioning all of the world's best composers to write percussion music. And now we have this body of work that is growing exponentially. And now there's more music than you would know what to do with. It's wonderful. I think people lump Glass and Reich together a lot. You know, they're in the same subgenre of contemporary music, but playing their music could not be a different experience. I mean, Glass, in my opinion, Glass is so much more difficult, staggeringly difficult compared to Reich, because yes, you're playing these phrases, and in many pieces you have to be looking at someone who will give a nod, say 2 measures before you're going to move on, but the way that he changes phrases is so specific. You know, you'll be playing, let's say you're playing 4 notes that are just rising in a scale. You're doing that 5 or 10 times, and then the next phrase is just 5 notes. So completely different time signature, completely different feel, but still very, very related to what you just did. You're just adding 1 more note on top, and maybe the next one adds 1 more note on the bottom or something like that. He just changes it little by little, whereas Steve Reich, when he changes, he'll maybe change a harmony, or change the meter, or change the orchestration, or it's sort of, well, not bigger changes, but just different changes that, for me at least, are easier to feel. I don't know, that is more organic for me than Glass. Glass is beautiful, it sounds timeless, you know, but it is, I used to play this piece, 2 Pages, as a duo with this pianist, Vicky Chow, this wonderful pianist, and that was one of the hardest things I had ever did. I mean, it was amazing. I thought it was such an otherworldly experience for me. It was, you know, I was really in this trance. I was somewhere else, really, really intensely focused, but really, really difficult. My schedule is very fluid. You know, because I play with many different groups and play in a lot of different places, every week sort of has a different set of challenges in it. You know, on a given week I might have rehearsal with the percussion quartet this day, and then meeting with a composer for a solo piece this day, and then rehearsal with a mixed chamber ensemble the next day for a concert that weekend, or something like that. So it's always a struggle to figure out, you know, how and when I'm going to learn the music that I need to learn, and sort of keep it all straight in my head. You know, like this summer I'm here in Pittsburgh right now for a month, which is great. And we're doing 4 different programs while I'm here, and then I leave right after that for 2 different festivals that have, you know, 4 or 5 other programs in which no music is shared. That's something that I'm working to adjust in my career, is to play more of the same music more times per year, just because I find that when it's possible to, I mean, you can overdo it when you're learning too many new pieces at once. Those performances are simply not going to be as good as performances of pieces that you've played many more times and have had a much longer period of time to learn and digest and really understand. So I'm spending time, you know, developing programs, solo programs, and chamber music programs, and focusing on that repertoire for a period of a year or 2 or whatever, and then moving on to other stuff. Are pieces or composers that I have championed, like the Chris Cerrone piece that you saw me play. That's a piece that I helped commission and have played maybe 15 or 20 times since then. And because of my relationship with Chris, and because of my unique take on the piece, a lot of opportunities have been opened up to both me and Chris, because he wrote that piece and because I've performed it. And so when people are looking for that piece, I'm certainly one of a few people that groups or organizations will turn to get a performance of that piece. Also, people will sometimes just call me and ask me to play whatever I want to play, because they've heard of me through one thing or another. So yeah, it's some of both. Like, I try to form close relationships with composers. That's one of many reasons why I do that. But it's really great to spend a lot of time with a composer while he's writing the piece, and then get the piece, and then really make it your own, and then be able to play it all over the place all the time. That's like, for me, it's a great sort of trajectory for a project like that. I just act as my own agent. You know, where an agent might be picking up the phone and speaking on my behalf, I pick up the phone and speak on my behalf. You know, so certainly much of what I do is based on personal connections, but I spend a lot of time just reaching out to people that I don't know and pitching ideas to them. You know, often it will help if, oh, Chris, you know this presenter at this series that you guys have worked together before, could you send a quick email introducing us and saying you'd recommend me for this or whatever? And that sort of thing usually really helps. That's why every project that you do has to be at the highest level that it can be, because inevitably there will be somebody there who will be a great collaborator in the future, whether it's a presenter or a composer or another performer, and you want to make sure that you're exhibiting your best qualities at every moment so that those opportunities are not lost. There are a few percussion ensembles that have management, and there are a few percussion soloists. There's a great percussionist, Colin Curry, who has great management. There's a few like that. So it is becoming a little more of a normal thing. It's hard because it's not something that most agents are used to selling. It's a very different thing. And also that there's a lot more logistical support that is required that is very new. It's something that an agent would have to learn a lot about, or they'd have to have been someone who knew about percussion in another life. I mean, honestly, for me, the most taxing part of all about it is not like booking the gigs. That part is fun, that part is great. It's figuring out where are the instruments coming from. Oh, I actually need to get into the hall the night before to set them up, and I need this many people to help me, and I need a parking space for my car. It has to be, I mean, there's like hundreds of little things that all have to happen. Once you've been doing this for a little while, they're just second nature and you just know. But if you haven't done it, these are not things that a pianist would need or a string quartet would need. So I think for me at least, I practice a lot. I mean, when I'm home and not performing or not traveling, I'm in my studio, for, I would say, between 9 and 12 hours a day, usually. And I'm obviously not playing my instrument for every second of that, but I do practice a lot. But unfortunately, like I was saying before, the vast majority of that time, like 90% or more, is spent either learning new notes for pieces I haven't played before, or relearning notes for pieces that I have played before. But I very rarely sit down. Maybe a couple days a year I get to sit down and I want to work on this articulation or this sound quality or this specific technique. That rarely happens anymore, which is why I encourage, when I work with students, I encourage people to do as much of that as they can while they're in school, because once you're out of school, the available time to do that is very, very small. So I teach at the Dwight School on the Upper West Side, which is like a prep school. I think I don't know if it's kindergarten, but it's very young through the end of high school, and they have a conservatory program, an after-school program, and they hired me when that started, which was I think 3 years ago. This will be my third or fourth year coming up. And I usually have, I don't know, I think at the end of last year we had maybe 6 or 7 students. And it ranged. When we started, we had like 2 or 3, and then at one point it was even a little higher than that, then it dropped down. It's growing, it's cool. But yeah, so I do that every week. And I also teach privately. It's not really right now so regular. It's more like there are various people who will come in and take lessons with me when they're in town, that sort of thing. There was a period when I was teaching a few people every week, but it's not I don't have time. My schedule is just so inflexible that I can't promise that, like on Fridays, I can't always be there to teach this person,